The $1.5 billion settlement shows that data has value and could be the next big bottleneck for the AI growth story. So Anthropic, the company that built Claude, one of the most popular AI models out there, bought about 7 million books and created its own personal library. The idea was to buy these books and basically extract their content page by page. Up until recently, people viewed that as fair use, which basically means it does not infringe on copyrights. But these courts have recently ruled that it does infringe, and they paid a $1.5 billion settlement to the authors of these books. Now, what does this ruling mean for data? And as the saying goes, data is the new oil. And I think that this ruling is opening up the human data market, which is going to be a $1 trillion market by 2033. And so I think one of the things that's interesting about this story is it shows something that's pretty much been okay on the internet over the last 25 years, which is essentially that big tech has all these platforms. They can suck up any internet information they want. You are using these products, and if they are free, it means you are the product. And basically, they can get smarter because these models are essentially training on your data, and you had no clue, right? And they made billions and billions and billions. And that's changing, right? And these decisions are taking place in courts. And it's not just in the US. And this process is going on in Germany as well. It's the same thing we saw with data regulation with, GDPR and the California Privacy Act. So data consent is one of the biggest issues coming up. And, this is an arms race, right? And now is the time of truth. And it's a crazy time to be alive, as a person and especially as an investor, because we're in the midst of the modern day industrial revolution and data is at the forefront of it. And I'm happy to dive into that. But it is definitely a historic day for, the data market, I would say, with some of these rulings. We are definitely in the early days for a couple of reasons. The first is that people are just starting to realize that their data is actually worth a lot, especially in the AI era, because you really have to think about it. AI models today are pretty smart, aren't they? But they still hallucinate. So now we're in this period of time where effectively OpenAI and Anthropic have sucked up the entire internet over the last 25 years, but now to get the next generation of the models, they need to refine the learning of those models. So what that means basically is they have to fine tune. If you think about what's happening in the space, if you're asking Chat a question, say we're going to talk about astrophysics or something really insane that or nuclear reactors, somebody has to know the answer to that. And so what happens is there are companies out there that are actually getting professionals that are physics masters, and they're paying them to basically give refinement learning to these models, and then the models get smarter, and then they learn. But you basically have to rebuild the whole internet using these AI models. And it's not just in the chat interfaces. So if we're talking about humanoids and robotics, the way that a robot learns is you need millions of hours of videos of you doing laundry at your house or cutting up vegetables, because the next generation of robots will be trained on millions of hours of human data to do those mundane tasks. But you have to really do everything that people know how to do. And the consequence of this process is trillions, tens of trillions of dollars that will be changed. And that's why it's an arms race. And now consent to data is such a huge thing. There's a lot of money to be made for consumers from their data, right? And I think that's the best thing about it. An AI algorithm consists of three things. It's the chips, right? That's required, the computer, right? And that's why NVIDIA is, I don't know what it is today, a $5-6 trillion company, right? And then we have the algorithm, and so that's actually the software of how this all works and how the system operates. And then the third thing that people are waking up to right now is the data piece, because without it, it would not work. And so when we think about things like robotics and when we think about things like agents, right, which are basically virtual agents that are going and doing these tasks, right? It could be an operator. It could also be a developer. It's very nuanced, but whether it's robotics or agents, you essentially will need more and more consumer data. And usually this is stuff that is very refined, because think about this, in order to have a robot at your house, it has to understand how to do those mundane tasks that I was just talking about. You need millions of hours of egocentric video, as it is called. Egocentric video is when your phone is here, and then it's like the first person perspective, the ego of this person, right? And so you have both hands doing things, and it trains in all these different environments, and I'm talking about per task. You require millions of hours for each task, and then you have to replicate that across a bunch of different modalities and careers. Imagine a mechanic who works on tires. Imagine a factory worker. Think about a fireman, Robots are coming. They're coming in the next decade, but they need new data to refine the learnings, because there's only so much video out there that's egocentric of people chopping up vegetables or of people doing laundry or of people sweeping. So for them to get where they need to be, they need new data. And so it's such a massive opportunity. And the companies that are supplying the data, there are some companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies that have been supplying this data that are new players in the space. Like Facebook, for instance, right? They bought 51% of a company, not on a public stock market, called Scale AI. So that company started 5 years ago, and they bought it at a $29 billion valuation. There's another company called Mercor, which is essentially a marketplace that effectively brings those specialized people, those physicians, those physicists, and those investment bankers to refine the learning of these AI models. And that company went from $1 billion in ARR to $2 billion in ARR in 4 months this year. And it was founded by 23-year-olds, right? Like very young kids that are starting that. And so this space is really moving, and the companies that have been kind of operating in the space and really understanding that attention is one of the most important things that we own in society are the companies that are going to be the big winners in the space. Think about how a company operates when we go and try and make a decision, right? It's like, oh, we need to do this product feature. Then a ticket is created and the developers code it. Then there's some sort of problem, and then there are all these communications that happen in your internal work communications that could be through email or could be through things like Slack, but ultimately a decision comes from that. Now think about that compounded over 10 years of a company's existence across hundreds of employees. It's literally like a ton of information. There are companies that are paying for the data corpus of companies millions of dollars in order to train the next generation of agents that will then go and be able to be the HR recruiter, that will go and be that developer, that will go and be that chief operations officer, because it's a much larger market for people to be able to take the careers of some of these kind of mid-level and senior level kind of executives, and for companies to operate smoother. That's basically what they're doing. And that means your data is worth a lot of money. But you are basically signing up to give away something that costs money that they would actually have to pay hundreds of dollars for, and you are just giving that away for nothing. And that's a significant issue. And I think that's what he's talking about. When you upload your finances, when you upload your health data, when you upload anything that's valuable, you're effectively giving away free money that otherwise should go back to you, and definitely should go back to your company if you're a business owner. The premise of the mode and where we started was really this idea that people spend, when we first started the company, I think it was 39 hours, and now we are getting closer to 50 hours a week on their smartphones. In context with that, Bridget, if you sleep 8 hours a day, that leaves 112 hours. If you spend 40 to 60 hours a week on your smartphone, you are dedicating half of your waking life to this device. And when you think about what you are doing on the device and whether you are scrolling, buying things, responding to messages, you are essentially being served advertisements. You are being served a variety of different data points that you are essentially feeding into these platforms. And who is getting all that money? And so basically our whole thesis as a company was, if people are going to spend this much time on this, certainly there's an opportunity for them to get some of that money back, and then you can make the smartphone free or better. So that was really the foundation of where our company started, and then we've extrapolated it into a ton of other opportunities where we now acquire other apps and have a very similar business model where some people can't afford to pay for a premium service, and we can basically be like, hey, if you give us this insight or you do this task, we will give you our service for free. And so far, Mode has been able to facilitate over $1 billion in earnings and savings back to consumers through this business model, and we've scaled to over 100 million monthly active users across our entire ecosystem, all with this idea of being built alongside everyday people. I mean, these companies were basically just hoovering up data as they always have, right? The Facebooks of the world, the TikToks, etc. And then people woke up and said, this is potentially the greatest technological innovation we've seen in the last 300 years. And this is something that needs to be regulated. And people need to be able to consent to this because these companies are really taking advantage of people. And that's where this whole story comes in with the consented data, right? And so that's really what we're excited about. And we have always been in the business of rewarding attention. And we use data to reward their attention. But then we started thinking, really, hey, like there's a lot more we could do in the data space. So we could have people share their data, whether that means filming videos of themselves doing those chores at home. If they want to do that, that's great. They can share their wearable information if they like. They can share what they are streaming on Spotify or Netflix if they like. Opt in for everything. The whole idea is really to give power back to the consumer. And there's a ton of money on the table here, and companies now have to pay for it because of rulings like the one we saw today with OpenAI. There's another big one. The Wall Street Journal is suing all the big labs for ripping off all its work over the last, couple decades. And so you see this over and over again, and you are not going to see less of it. And, it's just going to be more and more regulatory pressure. And so companies will need to have a budget to get that consented license data. And internally, we're seeing a lot of that in terms of the companies we're working with, which is better than getting this data as well. So like when people started really seeing that AI is here to stay, what did they all do? They went and bought NVIDIA stock, and then NVIDIA went from like $1 trillion to like $4 trillion in a super short period of time, which is pretty insane, and became the most valuable company in the world. Then people, especially investors, started thinking, okay, we have all these chips. What should we invest in? And then they're like, oh, like we should invest in energy stocks. We should invest in rare earth minerals. We should invest in everything that makes up what it takes to run a data center effectively, right? And so now there are all these like tertiary investments that people are thinking about now. Like it's the picks and shovels thing. I feel like people still haven't grasped that the alpha here is those data companies that are providing that data, the human data, to these models. And that's why I'm saying this market is going to grow to a $1 trillion+ market opportunity here in the coming years. And there's going to be some clear winners in the space, especially the companies that are diving headfirst into the space. I would look at how far along this company is in its journey because this space is growing and it's moving fast, but it is very finicky because one week it might be really big for the AI models to get workflow data. Another week it might be big to get egocentric data, kind of like the videos I was just saying. Another week they need image refinement. And so the market's always moving, and so it's hard to have consistency in the revenue. The other problem that you see in this space is that there's a lot of revenue concentration. And what I mean by that is there are basically 7 big frontier lab models, so you only have about 7 customers. They have unlimited money now. You have a limited number of clients. And a businessman's income depends on 2 or 3 customers. There are risks to that business, right? So they can be doing well one year, and then suddenly their revenue is down. So what I would look at is what the revenue that this company is doing is. So are they making money? They have other lines of business and income streams that are not just data-oriented. So for us, that's what we've always focused on. We earn money through subscriptions and advertising, but we also now have this data practice because we're sitting on so much information that has been just within our company. And now we can go work with those providers, and we have way better unit economics because we are not dependent on just data revenue. We make money in a bunch of different places. So those are the things I would look at as an investor. And it was D or Data Vault. If you look at their earnings ratio, really where they're at, they're still kind of newer in the space. And so those are the types of things I'd be looking at if I were an investor investing in the human data market these days. Imagine a capture, those sites that are like, we call all the traffic lights here. And so that's really data labeling. And you think you're doing security to get into a site to make sure that you're an actual human, not a bot. You're actually doing data labeling, and you're helping these models get better. So this company was doing that, but they were hiring a bunch of gig workers that could basically say, is this a cat or is this a dog? Is that a hamster or a cat? And then all these people are doing that for like a few cents, basically. And they scaled that business, and it was more sophisticated as these models got better. But what happened was about a year ago when Meta bought, Scale, it was actually contracting with all the other metadata competitors because all these big companies have their own models, and basically every other frontier lab was like, we don't want to work with Scale anymore because now Meta owns them. And so there's a conflict of interest. And so what's happened is now all these frontier labs are actually working with multiple different companies to collect their data because they don't want to have that same risk happen again where one of the big guys buys someone else, and then suddenly whoever was supplying that data can no longer supply it anymore. So it is an arms race for sure. It's not necessarily a winner takes all. But if you think of like what happened with the social networks, or like with Google and Fang and all these companies, it's like there are going to be some clear winners, and there's not room for like 50 of them. I think there's going to be like 5 clear winners or something. The stakes, however, are high. This technology is, again, like the biggest technology since the Industrial Revolution, and I think it's bigger than the internet at this point. There's this company called Cloudflare. Cloudflare powers about 1/5 of the internet today by working with publishers and similar partners. AI bots and AI agents are sending more traffic to sites than people are. And so that means, what are those agents and bots doing? They are performing tasks for people who are running, the AI itself, or they are crawling the internet for new information. So on September 15th, Cloudflare is blocking that traffic. So agents can no longer do that for the sites it powers. That means that people that own those websites as publishers, companies like MarketB, for example, will suddenly now be able to better monetize their data and their content. And these AI agents will be able to strip your content and insert it into its algorithm, which creates a new income opportunity for sites like Market. And it's not just on the human level. This is happening on a company level, and that's going on all over, right? And so I think that will take place a lot faster. I would say hopefully over the next 5 years, we will see these things actually materialize at a scale where they become like a household topic in a day.